there's nothing efficient about what's going on in attacking these programs. They're so small, they're minuscule, they're being administered on the ground by local communities. They're intended to get people farming, which is the whole purpose of the USDA existing. And now that's under threat because of political ideologies. And that's incredibly frustrating.
That's Carolina Mueller of the National Young Farmers Coalition. She's one of the guests on today's show. You're listening to Down to Earth, the Planet to Plate podcast, a co-production of the Radio Cafe and Quivira Coalition. I'm your host, Mary Charlotte Domandi. We're going to be talking today about what's going on in Washington, D.C. and how it's affecting the people who produce your food. That's right after this announcement. Save the date for Regenerate 2025 at the Santa Fe Convention Center, November 5th through 7th. This year's conference, Cultivating Adaptability, will highlight how people from all walks of life are responding to and igniting change through land management practices that help them work in partnership with nature, engaging communities to work together to pool resources and talents, and adapting to changing markets and climates. So mark your calendars. If you would like to be notified when we open registration, sign up for the Regenerate email list at regenerateconference.com. We hope to see you in Santa Fe. And now to our program. So on today's show, we're talking about the current political situation in Washington, D.C. and how it's affecting farmers and ranchers. We're joined by Carolina Mueller, Associate Coalition Director at the National Young Farmers Coalition, and Leah Ricci, Interim Executive Director of Quivira Coalition. National Young Farmers Coalition was founded about 15 years ago, and it serves not just young farmers, but people of all ages who were starting out in agriculture. They work to bring more power and agency to farmers and farmer-led organizations, and to change government policy so that the next generation of farmers can have the resources they need to grow good, healthy food and to make a good living. Quivira Coalition works with ranchers, farmers, government agencies, and land stewards to foster resilience on working lands. While their main focus is here in the American West, they work with people all over the world to build a healthier food system and to offer climate change solutions. They have apprenticeship and fellowship programs to foster the next generation of farmers and land stewards. They have science initiatives. They have education and community programs, including this podcast. Welcome, Leah and Carolina, to Down to Earth.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having us.
So let's get into today's subject at hand, which is what's happening in the federal government with respect to farmers and ranchers with all the, from the outside and I think from the inside in Washington, D.C. too, from the people I've talked to, looks like unprecedented change, chaos, freezes, layoffs. Carolina, what are you seeing?
Yeah, unprecedented seems to be the word of our generation, doesn't it? From market crashes to COVID to now what's going on in the federal government. We're seeing a lot of disruption that really began in earnest at the end of January with the executive orders that came down, pausing certain grant initiatives and reviewing contracts and then canceling contracts. So, the short story is that it's left young farmers nationwide in financial distress. So the young farmer stories that we've collected report that over $5 million in approved funds and at least $850,000 in pending reimbursements are locked and multiple programs are stalled. So it's pretty serious.
Reimbursements is particularly difficult because people have spent their own money with a signed contract saying they're going to get that money back, and then they don't.
That's right. And they have met their end of the agreement, right? They have produced the food. They have, invested their time and resources into feeding their community, and they're being left in the lurch.
Leah, what are you hearing from Quivira agrarians?
Yeah, I think certainly unprecedented really resonates. I think the other word is uncertainty. There has been so much that has changed in the last couple months since the new administration related to executive orders, pausing all federal funding and then reinstating some of it. An example that directly affects farmers and ranchers is EQIP payments. So that's the Environmental Quality Incentives Program of NRCS. That one was frozen. It has since been released. But I think what has happened is there is now even more mistrust of people just aren't sure what's going to stick of some of the changes that have happened recently, which ones will go back to how they were working before. And so, yeah, I think one of the biggest things that we're really feeling and seeing with our ranchers and farmers is just deepening mistrust of, these programs that many folks have come to rely on, of just not being sure what to believe anymore, of if they're going to come through. Yeah, and I think it goes far enough that we've had some folks say to us that if these programs aren't going to work, that they are seriously considering whether they're able to pursue agriculture as a career or not.
Are you hearing the same kind of thing, Carolina?
Yeah, there's already been so much disruption from so many different sources, right? So from the pandemic to the effects of climate change, to effects of inflation. Now we don't really know what is going to happen with tariffs. I will say that for young farmers, according to our National Young Farmer Survey from 2022, 49% of young farmers hadn't accessed any USDA programs. With, of those, 71% were unaware that there were even any programs that could help them. And so for the last, since we started, we have really been beating the drum that the USDA works for us. They're supposed to work for you, the farmer. These are resources that you are investing your tax dollars into that you should be able to benefit from. And it's a huge betrayal of that relationship building that we've been doing, with this administration, to just come in and say, actually, we don't work for you. And actually, we're going to cut all of the services that you have come to rely on, right? So like Leah said, NRCS funding, like EQIP programs, those are the most used USDA programs that young farmers are using, whether that's cover cropping, whether that's season extension through high tunnels. Those are the ones that really have been working for folks. And the fact that those are being stalled, cut, undermined, staff being laid off, that's a real pointed message from Secretary Rollins' office that young farmers are not a priority to this administration.
And I would dare say farmers in general. And basically, this gets to the heart of this division that's been going on, my certainly entire adult life and earlier, is the question of whether government is of, by, and for the people, or whether government is, as Ronald Reagan famously said, the problem. And the current attitude seems to be that we don't need government, and that government is not helpful, and that the people can't have it and don't deserve it. And, where farm programs are concerned, some of these programs we're talking about are really essential. I was wondering if you, Leah, could describe some of the programs that Quivira is involved in or has been involved in.
So we right now have quite a bit of funding from USDA that supports a number of different programs at Quivira. The one program that we have right now that is currently frozen is our Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities grant. So that's a USDA program that provides funding across the nation. I think there's over 135 projects that support ranchers and farmers in adopting conservation practices, and specifically with the goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and sequestering carbon. So these projects, they measure climate benefits, they expand markets for agricultural products produced by ranchers and farmers. And for Quivira specifically, it's a nearly $4 million grant that funds our Soil to Supper project. And that project's really focused on supporting circular economies in the Southwest, so helping livestock producers create amendments, so compost and biochar, out of waste products that come from their own ranches. So basically turning waste into amendments that allows them to improve their soil health, improve the efficiency of their business, and get more locally produced food, grass-fed meats into local markets. So it's a win-win-win for producers, for the environment, for local economies, for food access. And this program has been frozen since early January. So we have had to put a pause on activities because we have not seen payment from USDA extending as far back as work that we did in late 2024. And so across the board, all projects that are funded through this grant have not been reimbursed. And I think what's been most challenging is, again, just the uncertainty of that it's frozen. So it has not been terminated, but no one is getting paid. And so this means both a stop to incentives that are supposed to go directly to producers who are enrolled in these projects. It means organizations unable to pay their staff. So we are fortunate that we have not had to do this yet, but many other organizations that receive PCSC funds have had to furlough staff, stopping payments to contractors who provide technical assistance and support to producers, and essentially putting a halt to all of the good work that has happened so far to support producers, farmers and ranchers across the country in adopting practices that are better for the environment, better for their businesses, and better for local food production.
A lot of what's going on right now and what both of you are describing appears to be illegal. In other words, if you have a signed contract and then the person who you signed it with doesn't hold up their end of the deal, that does not seem to be legal. What is going on in terms of people actually fighting back? Are there lawsuits? Are either or both of you involved in the pushback?
I mean, I'm not a lawyer, so I'll say that. I really can't say whether or not the cancellation of these contracts are illegal. I will say that they are disruptive and that they are harmful. I will say that. But we are seeing organizations pushing back. There's at least one lawsuit that's been filed against the USDA by a number of organizations, including Pasa Sustainable Agriculture in Pennsylvania, Cultivate Kansas City, Rural Action, so RAFI in the Southeast, Marble Seed in the Midwest, and so many other organizations. And then, the other thing that we're doing, so National Young Farmers Coalition is not currently part of any litigation, but we are mobilizing our farmers to put pressure on their legislators, right? Because the constituents putting pressure on legislators means that hopefully if the legislators are paying attention and if they're being responsive to their constituent base, they're going and putting pressure on the administration and they're asking tough questions. I mean, at least that's the way that it's supposed to work. So that is a way that it maybe doesn't feel the most impactful in the moment, but that is an action that everyone can and should be taking, is calling their legislators and saying, you need to, these contracts need to be honored and this freezing of federal funding needs to be unfrozen. I mean, it is not acceptable.
Yeah, and I think part of what has been so challenging about much of this is trying to untangle the web of where to even start the challenges of, who can we work with to figure out what is actually in contracts for some of these programs, where does the funding for some of these programs come from, and trying to figure out what sort of recourse organizations have, whether it's farmers or ranchers or organizations that receive USDA funding. I know for the Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities, the Climate Smart Ag Network, they have convened a number of organizations who received those projects and have sent a letter to Secretary Rollins. I think it was signed by almost 40 organizations that received that funding. We have also sent a letter to a number of New Mexico officials outlining the harm that's happening to New Mexico's agricultural community as a result of these funding freezes, and specifically the PCSC freeze, and urging them to take action. And we have gotten a positive response back from Senator Heinrich's office and from the New Mexico Attorney General's office. There was also the Honor Farmer Contracts Act that was filed by Senator Cory Booker and House Representative Vasquez, and that had over 350 farm, food, and rural organizations signed on. And then I think there's a number of nonprofit organizations that are really trying to get organized to provide legal resources to farmers and ranchers and the organizations who support them, just to try to understand what is happening and what options people have to try to challenge some of what is happening. And I'll just say we have met with a few nonprofits that offer legal support to farmers and ranchers and nonprofit organizations, and it's not straightforward trying to figure out, what is legal or not. Or I think even regardless, we're seeing things that, I think months ago would have felt much more straightforward, of a sort of cut and dry, like either it's legal or not, or, it's in the contract, so they need to honor it. But I think what we're seeing is just a lot of, I think, intentional confusion around how do you go about navigating this and figure out how to challenge things. And if you do challenge things, will it go as you expect that it should?
Yeah. And I'm sure for many people, there's a math problem of how much you're spending on lawyers to get money that you might or might not actually ever receive back. Mm-hmm. Carolina, let's talk a little bit about the National Young Farmers Coalition. Your mission is all about connecting grassroots farmers and farmer-led groups to the federal government. The federal government is a sprawling entity. It's agencies, it's congresspeople, it's all kinds of things. What does that work? What does that actually look like, the day-to-day work that you do?
Yeah, so, our mission is to shift power and change policy to equitably resource our new generation of working farmers. And the way that we do that is by resourcing and training young farmers to share their stories with lawmakers, because we believe that through that they can remake the food system to be more equitable, just, and in service to our communities and the land. So that looks a number of ways, right? I mean, we have a number of grassroots work that happens. I myself oversee the Chapters program, which has about 30 chapters all over the country, where farmer leaders are stepping up and building place-based solutions to addressing the unique challenges that they face. So whether they're hosting a quarterly potluck or running a disaster relief program, it's really up to them to decide on how they want to address that. And so we work quite closely with them. We also have a fellowship program called Root and Bloom, where farmers are trained to understand the policy setting process and then identify leadership opportunities that they might want to plug into. We're actually currently accepting applications for the next round of that, and it is a stipended fellowship. And we have a policy committee that is led by farmers. And so we have all of these different mechanisms by which we are speaking to, hearing from, in community with agriculturalists, in hearing what their needs are. And then our policy team translates those challenges, looks for policy windows and opportunities to really plug in. We work on things like the Farm Bill, which is a whole other conversation we could be having right now.
What Farm Bill,
right? We're like 3 years behind, which means that we have to keep plugging away at this. We've had to reintroduce. So the Farm Bill is this big, gigantic set of bills. It's made up of these smaller bills called marker bills. And we're in the process of reintroducing the marker bills that we had already introduced during the last Congress. And so we're having to go and do our work again, which is fine. Okay. And so that includes the new Producer Security Act. And actually, Representative Gabe Vasquez sponsored that one. And so that's intended to create some pathways by which we invest in community-led land access solutions. We have some marker bills that are going in the Farmer to Farmer Education Act, where we can earmark some funding from the Natural Resource Conservation Service to pay farmers to teach other farmers, because we found that that is how most people learn how to farm. And so, we do all of this translating. And then once we have some things in motion, then we go back to our base and we mobilize them, calling your representatives, writing an op-ed, sharing your story in some other way, talking to the media. I mean, we have all of these different mechanisms by which we plug in farmers to be themselves the leaders to move these policy solutions forward.
And it's tricky work to track, I would imagine, because, one op-ed doesn't change the world, but this grassroots effort where there's op-eds in many papers in many states and that kind of storytelling, it has sort of a cumulative effect, I would think.
Yeah, and federal policy reform is not a sprint, it's a marathon. It takes an incredibly long time to see change come to fruition, which is very challenging and unsatisfying in some ways, because you really have to have the long view. But I mean, isn't that like range management too, right? You're not going to see healthier soil from one season to the next. You have to keep putting in those smaller actions every single day, every single week. And that's how we see these op-eds, these opportunities to invite legislators onto people's farms and show them around, lobbying days at the Capitol, flying into DC. I mean, we have all of these different mechanisms, and every single little action builds towards bigger change, because this is a huge ship that we're trying to turn. And so, yeah, it's going to take a lot of work and it's going to take a lot of time, but we're working towards something that is revolutionary, frankly, which is a supportive infrastructure for young and beginning farmers to be able to get into and stay in agriculture.
And the stakes are pretty high, namely having a food system in the future.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing land loss and soil degradation, right? 40% of U.S. farmland is expected to transition in the next 2 decades. Once land is lost from agriculture, it's very, very rare that it ever returns to ag. So right now, I live in Central Texas, just outside of Austin. The property next to my partner's farm was just sold to a gravel mining company. This is pristine, riverside, beautiful, natural, like just a gorgeous, amazing soil, very fertile. We have access to water, which is not a given. And it's now going to get torn up, and there's a rock crushing plant going in. That's what's happening. And there are no mechanisms by which we can protect those, because it's Texas, right? And industry is more important than anything. But not only are we losing land, we're also losing farmers. I mean, we're hemorrhaging farmers. The average farmer age is almost 60. There are very few transition plans in place. So we're potentially losing an entire generation of farmers. And this is 78% of our network, according to our survey from 2022, identifies first-generation farmers. So that means that not only are people not able to access land, right? They don't have access to family land anymore. They're also needing to learn how to farm from scratch. That's not an easy set of skills to learn. And then on top of that, they have to run a business and make ends meet and pay themselves and or their employees. That's what we're up against. So yeah, these have national security implications, because, I mean, who are we going to rely on for our food production if it's not coming from the United States?
Right. What are some of the accomplishments? I mean, you've been around, National Young Farmers Coalition has been around since 2010. So in 15 years, what are the things that you're most proud of and that you feel like are real accomplishments?
There's a lot of things. So a lot of them we're playing defense on right now. A lot of those wins that we've made are now on the chopping block. So for example, the Farm Ranch Stress Assistance Network, FARSAN, which is a mental health support program from the USDA. There are different regions. And that came out of some organizing that happened because our network lost farmers to suicide, and really highlighting the need for additional mental health support and creating policies around it and getting it into the Farm Bill. Young Farmers was involved in that, and it wasn't just Young Farmers, of course, but that's a massive win that we were able to secure. And now we're playing defense because we're not clear on what the future of that program and that funding is going to be. We also have the Land Capital Market Program, which was a historic investment of the Inflation Reduction Act funding, where we were able to secure $300 million from the USDA, which in the grand scheme of things is a drop in the bucket. I want to be very clear. The kinds of programs that we're talking about, these are a percentage of the programs that are funded through the Farm Bill and by the USDA. So it sounds like a lot of money. It's really not. But so we were able to to secure that. And the investment was in equitable land access programs through community-led farming projects. And now that is seriously under threat. We're already seeing in the South, a grantee was prepared to launch a regranting program to support farmers with the cost of down payments and back taxes on properties, infrastructure, and landowner incentives. These are very, very practical ways that we get people and keep people on land. This program is now on hold. In the West, a grantee was preparing to launch a mini grant program to help farmers lease and purchase land. USDA has paused all of those reimbursements. So now that organization has to pause and even consider layoffs. My last example, because you can see I'm really fired up about this, but there's another grantee who serves 10 states that was depending on those funds to expand its training program and provide low interest loans for land purchases. And now they're deciding on whether or not to terminate contracts with farmers. They have to stop preparing land for spring planting. They have to furlough or lay off staff. I mean, there's nothing efficient about what's going on in attacking these programs. These are so small, they're minuscule, they're being administered on the ground by local communities. They are intended to get people farming, which is the whole purpose of the USDA existing. And now that's under threat because of political ideologies. And that's incredibly frustrating.
And I think there's something really important there, because the kind of programs you're describing are programs that allow people to become independent. It's not like they are then reliant on the federal government forever. It's like giving them training wheels and letting them go and do their thing.
These are not ongoing subsidies, to your point. You know, this is technical assistance. This is one-off support, but these are worthwhile investments. And not only are they worthwhile, they're needed. Yeah. You know, because when we surveyed our network, 59% of farmers named accessing affordable land as very or extremely challenging. Land. That has been the result of every single survey that we've put out there. What is your top challenge? It has always been land.
Leah, let's talk about Quivira a little bit. Quivira Coalition has been around since the mid to late 1990s and has accomplished also a great deal of work, especially here in the Southwest. It's a New Mexico organization. What are some of the things that you can tell us that Quivira has actually accomplished, and what's that looking like now?
Yeah. Well, first, I also just want to say, in addition to all of the sort of policy work and programs that Carolina mentioned that National Young Farmers Coalition is working on, I think something that is really important that they do and that Quivira does as well is helping to provide a sense of community for people who have hope for a better future for people who are working in agriculture and land stewardship. And particularly, I think with young farmers and ranchers, of helping them feel like they're not alone in their challenges and that there are so many people who are actually sharing sort of the same challenges and the same hope for the future. And so I think that's really important, and I think that's a big piece of what Quivira does. And so we were founded, as you said, in the late 90s, and at a time when there was an incredible amount of mistrust between conservation and agriculture communities. And we were really founded around the idea of the radical center, which is bringing people together from different backgrounds and beliefs towards the shared goal of land stewardship. And so really sort of challenging the idea that, you know, if we have different backgrounds and sort of different motivations for coming to land stewardship, that we have to be adversaries of each other, but that we actually do have to work together, and we have a lot more in common than we might think at first glance. And we have come a long way since then. I think in the early days, it was really about convincing people that regenerative agriculture is possible and that agriculture can actually be a part of the solution to degradation to land and climate change. And now, in recent years, our work has been more about getting those resources and technical assistance to the communities who need it. And so that includes both beginning ranchers and farmers and historically underserved communities. Yeah, so I think less about convincing people that regenerative agriculture is a thing and is possible, and more about getting support and technical assistance to people who are really ready to implement regenerative agriculture, but need some support in order to make it happen.
What are some of the accomplishments that you're most proud of on Quivira's part?
Yeah, so let's see. With our new agrarian program, we have been running apprenticeships. So they're full season, fully immersive, full-time jobs, working with experienced ranchers on regenerative, primarily livestock ranches. And we now have over 150 graduates of that program. So that program's been around since 2009. And yeah, just seeing the way that program has grown and now has become a self-sustaining community. We have graduates of our program who are now mentors to other beginning ranchers and farmers. We have expanded to also include a couple of fellowship programs. So one that provides a more flexible way to support beginning ranchers and farmers through a fellowship. So for people who aren't able to up and leave to do an apprenticeship, we meet them where they're at and provide supplemental education and access to our community and resources. And then we also just launched a manager fellowship program that is designed to support graduates of the program and other young ranchers and farmers who are trying to move from a ranch hand position into entrepreneurship or ranch management. So that's one where I think just, seeing the way that program has grown and now has this really robust community that is intergenerational. Our education program, we do a lot of workshops and technical assistance that's really community driven. And so with that program, we partner with organizations and communities in New Mexico and bring technical assistance around land management and grazing and erosion control and try to make it really responsive to the needs of the communities that we work with. Our Carbon Ranch initiative does both research and technical assistance that's really focused on helping ranchers and farmers improve their soil health practices, which is particularly challenging in the arid Southwest. And then our Regenerate conference is, I don't know what year will be going on this year, but is just such an important place to bring people together in community. And that's another one of our activities where early on with some of the challenges to federal funding, we thought, are we going to be able to do the conference this year? If we have federal grants that are cut that have supported the conference, can we afford to do it? Will people be able to afford to come to the conference? And we are moving forward with it no matter what. And we're going to do what we can to try to keep the conference affordable, but decided that especially in times like now, it's more important than ever that we have spaces to bring people together in community so that we can support one another and continue moving towards our shared goal of a more resilient future.
I'm just going to say, for those who are listening who might not have heard of the Regenerate Conference, I think it's at regenerateconference.com, but you can find it. It is such an energizing experience for me personally and for so many of the people who go there, just to be with other like-minded people. And those like-minded people are so different from each other, and I think they make up that term, the radical center, that Quivira, I think, coined, which is, you've got farmers and ranchers and land managers and people across the political spectrum, and we tend not to talk about politics when we're there, and people who look really different from one another and different ages and different generations. And the fact that that group gets along and feeds each other in the way that it does is an extraordinary accomplishment. And I'm glad it's going to keep going on. It's in Santa Fe, New Mexico this coming November. Yeah. Early November. Let's talk about some resources that farmers, like, if you're listening to this and you're like, holy hell, what do I do? Where are people turning for information, guidance, and not to mention solidarity?
Well, as Leah mentioned earlier, part of what's so hard about this is that this is affecting so many different programs at the USDA that are in very different offices, that have very different funding sources. And so it'll be very hard to find a one-size-fits-all solution. I will say that National Young Farmers Coalition published a blog on March 13 that you can find on our website, things that you can do today in response to the executive orders. And so that blog post, which I'll send over so that y'all can link it, that includes a link to applying for the EQIP Bridge Loan Program. There's also a Regenerative Farmer Assurance Fund. You can and should continue to share your funding freeze stories. We have a current action that where we're collecting those. Urge Congress to put pressure on the USDA to unfreeze those funds. Contact your representative in support of the Honoring Farmer Contracts Act. There we go. And yeah, and supporting the organizations that you feel aligned with, right? Whether that's the Quivira Coalition and becoming a member and supporting with your resources, or National Young Farmers Coalition, or one of the other very, very many groups that are working so hard to get things back on track. And we will be having to do a lot of recovery for the foreseeable future on this.
Yeah, a few other specific organizations or spaces that I recommend. So one organization that we have worked with quite a bit is Farm Commons. They offer resources broadly for building legal resilience of farmers and ranchers and organizations that support them. And they have been incredibly helpful in providing some guidance on how to even start thinking about how to approach if you've had funding frozen. Another organization, so the Quivira convenes the New Mexico Coalition to Enhance Working Lands. It's NMCOOL, it's spelled CEWL. And that's a group that's specifically for organizations, agencies, or others who support ranchers and farmers and conservation work in New Mexico. We host monthly meetings. That's a space for those groups to connect with one another and share resources. And in the last few months, those monthly calls have been really focused on allowing folks to share what is happening and how they're working through some of this. And then another group that's doing important work, and Carolina, you may have other examples of groups like this, but AgWell is a project of Rocky Mountain Farmers Union, and their goal is to provide support systems and social connection for farmers and ranchers. And they work specifically with farmers and ranchers in Colorado, New Mexico, and Wyoming. And just to say that, yeah, I think a lot of what is happening is really hard for people on a lot of levels. And if anyone is struggling or having a hard time, to reach out to someone at AgWell or a similar organization. And I'll just say that with all these organizations, if you don't find what you're looking for on their websites, like reach out to someone. That I think, again, part of what has been so challenging about the last few months is just the pace and the overwhelming volume of things that are happening in regards to funding freezes and funding cuts and executive orders. And I know these organizations, like if you go to their website, it might not jump out right away of like how to find the help that you're looking for, but that all of these groups have staff who are really invested in supporting farmers and ranchers and the people who support them. And so whether you're looking, for some connection, some support with navigating the challenges of what's happening, legal guidance, or just to be able to connect with other organizations who are navigating this, that those are three great groups that I would recommend reaching out to.
And we will connect to all of them in the show notes, by the way.
And for folks that don't live in Colorado, Wyoming, or New Mexico, Farm Aid does have a crisis hotline that is free and confidential that can be accessed. So just Google Farm Aid hotline and you'll find that information as well.
What kind of support have you been seeing from our elected officials, our Congress people? I know there's a lot of division, obviously, in Congress right now, but who have you seen really stepping up to support farmers, support young farmers, support agrarians trying to survive in this time?
Yeah, so Representative Vasquez has been a big supporter, as has Lujan's office has been really fantastic, and even going so far as to invite speakers from our network to come and testify before Congress.
So Quivira sent a letter to a number of New Mexico officials, and Senator Heinrich is one of the senators whose staff reached out to try to get a better sense of what's happening with the PCSC freeze and have offered to be in touch with their contacts at USDA to better understand the situation and see what sort of traction they can get.
Yeah, so we have, like I mentioned, we have a number of bills that are being reintroduced into Congress, right? And so in addition to Senator Cory Booker's work with the Honor Farmer Contracts Act, we also have Representative Nikki Budinsky from Illinois, Zach Noon from Iowa, Joe Courtney from Connecticut. I mean, we really have supporters from all over the country. Tina Smith, Gabe Vasquez from New Mexico, as I mentioned. We also have Ben Ray Lujan. Like I said, he's really been a huge cheerleader for the work that we're doing and very much a champion of the next generation of farmers telling their story and speaking to Congress and testifying about what programs we need and what's working and what isn't. So, yeah, really grateful for Senator Lujan's support.
One of the things that I think is really important and interesting about the National Young Farmers Coalition and Quivira both is that a lot of young farmers really are doing things, whether they're first-generation farmers or whether they're following in their parents' footsteps or whatever. They're doing things, they're seeing things differently from previous generations. What does that look like?
Yeah, Leah, you kind of touched on this earlier, right? This idea of like not really needing to convince people to buy into regenerative agriculture. I mean, 86% of the respondents that answered our survey a couple of years ago described their production methods as regenerative. So that sort of climate awareness is very front and center in terms of our generation of farmers. Also coming back to agriculture after being separated from it in some capacity. So for example, my grandmother on my father's side was German, and she grew up and was raised on a farm. And during World War II, they had to flee and abandon that farm and weren't able to come back to it. But she was an avid gardener and her garden outlived her. And, there's a calling that I think a lot of people in my generation are feeling to come back to land and to be in more harmony with nature. And I think the solemn task of feeding our communities is another really big motivator. So that stewardship. And one of the things that I've been really, really excited to see, and one of the things that I love so much about my work, is seeing people making the connection between the things that they're experiencing, the challenges that they're facing, and the potential solutions to those problems, and making that connection to policy and getting more involved in civic engagement, because there's been so much, like as much as we've been disconnected from agriculture, we've also been disconnected from civic engagement and being in relationship with our political system. And I'm seeing a lot of people really feeling very angry and very frustrated, and seeing this as a call to participate and re-engage. And so there's this parallel happening that I think is very exciting for me, because it is a crucial tenet of democracy that we are participating in it, whether it's at the local or the federal level. And so for the farmers that are part of our networks, the skills that they're learning for federal policy reform, that all is applicable at the state level, at the county level, in your town council, like at all of those levels. And so taking matters into their own hands and really being the change agents that we sort of have to be.
Leah, what about you? What are you seeing?
Well, first, I want to be clear that, we certainly have a number of farmers and ranchers who we work with, and particularly mentors in our new agrarian program, who have really been thought leaders when it comes to regenerative agriculture and regenerative practices, in some cases, since before I was even born. So we definitely have people in our community who have really been leading the way, who are from the older generation. But I think in particular for new folks and, people that we see in our new agrarian program, because of the barriers that they face, to some extent it's, they're motivated to do this because they care about it, but a lot of it's also they have to. if they are trying to start a career in agriculture, especially if you are not coming from a family that already has land that will be given to you, you have to focus on creative marketing and diversification. You have to be working in partnership with other young people and, being creative in how you think about accessing land. And I think this generation also knows that they have to focus on climate resilience. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to make it. And so I think this generation really feels the challenge acutely, and they are working really hard and being really creative because of their passion and their dedication to agriculture and food production and land management. And to some extent, they are meeting these challenges because there is no other way.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about that either of you would like to mention before we go?
Oof. I mean, there's so much, Leah. I feel like, I don't know about you, but I feel like I could talk about this for days, but I don't think we should do that to your listeners. I wanted to echo this, the value of bringing people together. And I think one of the beautiful things about a regional organization like the Quivira Coalition is that geographically, at least, you're closer together, so you can be in person. And certainly for young farmers, our chapters present opportunities for that as well. But we're doing this on a national scale, and so we do a lot of virtual convening. And so we've been hosting monthly front porch calls, which are open to the public. They're free to attend. We feature different partners and leaders from our network. It's a really great opportunity to just hear what's going on and just learn a little bit more about the work that's happening. And then this year we are relaunching the leadership conference for chapter leaders specifically. So bringing people together to be in community, in real life, for a few days. It's also going to be in early November. And I'm just really looking forward to creating that, because for me, when I was a chapter leader, when I was farming, coming together in that way and seeing, oh, I'm not alone. There are actually people who feel similarly to the way that I do and who are passionate the way that I am and who are going to work themselves to the bone because we believe in a better food system and because we believe in the role of agriculture for that, and building those relationships that are maintained to this day. And so, yeah, I think more than ever, now is a great time to be coming, hosting a potluck at your house with your neighbors, bringing your farmer friends together. I mean, this is a good time to find some respite and some joy and some laughter and some, ideally, a good meal is in there as well.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar, that I think we often, expect progress to be linear. Like when I was talking earlier about, in Quivira's early days, it was really about trying to get people to believe that regenerative agriculture is possible. And, now we've moved on to trying to get support and technical assistance to the people who, really want it. And yeah, I think, progress isn't linear. And, I think the setbacks that we've been feeling the last few months are certainly much more challenging than I think any of us were expecting, or hope to encounter. But I think we need to expect that progress isn't going to be linear. And this is, one of many setbacks that we will face on the road to a more resilient future. And we need to be together in community. We need to be supporting each other. We need to be collaborating with each other to get through this and other challenges that for sure will come up in the future. And so, yeah, go find your local Young Farmers chapter, reach out to us at Quivira Coalition, get involved in your local community. I think organizations that have had federal funding, collaboration has always been important, but I think going forward, it's going to be more critical than ever that we're really working together with each other to best support each other and support the communities that we serve. So yeah, I think now more than ever, it's important that we're working together through this, that we're not alone in facing these challenges, and we will get through it, and we need to support each other.
My mantra has been, there will be an after.
Yeah. The National Young Farmers Coalition is on the web at youngfarmers.org, and Quivira is quiviracoalition.org, and that will also be spelled out in our show notes. Carolina Mueller and Leah Ricci, thank you so much for being with us on Down to Earth.
Yeah, thanks for having us and for hosting this important conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much. I hope that everyone listening feels heard and hopefully a little heartened.
You've been listening to Down to Earth. We would love it if you would support this program, which you can do by going to patreon.com/down-to-earth planet to plate, where you can sign up for as little as $3. Patreon is Patreon. And also please rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. The Quivira Coalition is a not-for-profit and a community network of ranchers, farmers, conservationists, scientists, educators, and many others dedicated to regenerative practices that produce healthy food, support meaningful livelihoods, sustain biodiversity, and remedy the impacts of climate change. To learn more about Quivira and how you can support their work, visit quiviracoalition.org, Quivira. And finally, this show is a production with the Radio Cafe. You can check out radiocafe.org to hear back episodes of this show and also find all kinds of other shows on a wide variety of topics as well. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.